Imagine a castle lost in the Carpathian Mountains. Winter. The wind howls through the towers as if the very walls are screaming in pain. And inside, behind thick stone doors, the most beautiful woman in Hungary slowly lowers herself into a bath filled with human blood. Welcome to the darkest page of European history.
I beg you, keep your head
When
down.
people talk about serial killers, they usually mean men. But women were among the monsters too. One of them, Countess Bathory, is listed in the Guinness Book of World Records as the most prolific female murderer in human history. She is blamed for the deaths of over 600 girls and young women. She bathed in their blood, attempting to prolong her own youth. She is still portrayed in movies, written about in books, featured in TV shows, and included in video games. In her quest for the recipe for eternal youth, she whipped girls, dragged them by their hair, pricked them with needles, and tore their skin with pincers, and even tore pieces of flesh out of them with their teeth. Then their arteries were severed, the blood drained, and filled the bath into which the seductive countess submerged herself. She relished the torture. She relished the sight of blood. For years, a literal conveyor belt of death operated in her castle. You are watching EasyEvoMotion, and today I will tell you the story of Erzsébet Báthory, the most bloodthirsty serial killer in history. To the east of Bratislava, on a large green hill, stand the ruins of Čachtice Castle. The walls are overgrown with moss, the ceilings have collapsed, but the dungeons terrify with their depth and cold, even on a hot summer day. Today, tourists come here. Guides meet them at the gates and tell the exact same story. The story of the woman thanks to whom this castle entered legend. Locals called her the Mistress of Čachtice, or simply the Blood Countess. But in life, her name was Erzsébet Báthory. This woman is one of the greatest mysteries of European history. Dozens of legends, hundreds of speculations, theories and assumptions are told about her. But was it really how they say? Many Hungarian historians doubt her monstrous bloodthirstiness. Could she have simply fallen victim to the politics and black PR of her era? Imagining that one person could kill hundreds of people is truly difficult. But it's exactly because it's so hard to believe that we love this story. Let's break it down, step by step. Erzsébet was born on August the 7th, 1560, into one of the most powerful families in Hungary. The Bathory clan owned vast lands. They controlled Transylvania. They possessed untold treasures and colossal political influence. Her maternal uncle, Stephen Bathory, was the King of Poland. Her grandfather, István IV, was the Palatine, the viceroy to the King of Hungary. But this grandeur had a dark side. To keep wealth within the clan, the Bathorys practiced inbreeding for centuries. Erzsébet's parents also came from two branches of the exact same family, and there was a price to pay. Mental disorders, epilepsy, and outbursts of uncontrollable rage. Erzsébet herself suffered from severe migraines and seizures from childhood, during which she would black out. Perhaps it was then, in her childhood, that the monster within her was already sleeping, waiting to wake up. In 1575, at the age of 15, Erzsébet got married. The wedding was magnificent, 4,500 guests. As a wedding gift, her spouse presented her with that very Čachtice Castle and 12 surrounding villages. Her husband was Count Ferenc Nadasdy, a descendant of another influential Hungarian family. First he studied in Vienna, then he left to fight the Turks. He didn't live a long life. He is remembered as a commander, though no resounding victories are credited to him. Most of his time was spent on military campaigns, and his young wife was left alone in a massive castle. But even before this marriage, a certain story took place. People still whisper about it today. They say that at age 13, Erzsébet got pregnant by a servant, a lackey named Laszlo Bende. When her future husband Ferenc found out, he did not forgive. The lackey was castrated and thrown to a pack of dogs. The pregnant girl was taken to another family estate. There, she gave birth to a daughter, Anastasia. The child was immediately given to another woman from the Bathory clan to save the family from shame. But no documents regarding this girl survived, and many historians are certain the infant was simply killed. There is another version of the legend, that all this happened after the wedding, but the essence remains the same. The first blood in her life was spilled very early on.
Erzsébet Báthory was beautiful, incredibly beautiful. Milk-white skin, thick black hair down to her waist, delicate, almost doll-like facial features. In an era when most noble women looked 50 by the time they hit 30, Erzsébet was a living piece of art, and she knew it. Since childhood, she was showered with compliments. The best artists were commissioned to paint her portraits. The mirror became her main conversational partner, her best friend, her religion. She spent hours in front of it. But she had another trait, a strange one, a disturbing one. Erzsébet always punished her maids herself. While it was customary for other nobles to delegate this to servants, she insisted, personally, with her own hands. She loved beating the girls, dragging them by their hair, and if blood appeared, her face would change. She became obsessed. The sight of blood aroused her. She was fascinated by torture. She invented them herself. Once, her husband Ferenc was returning from a military campaign and saw a naked maid in the courtyard, covered in flies and ants. The girl was still alive. Erzsébet calmly explained, "She was stealing pears. I smeared her with honey to teach her a lesson." History is silent on how her husband reacted, but this man was the only one she seemingly feared. And then, in 6004, Ferenc dies during yet another military campaign. From that day on, a literal hell began for the villagers around the castle. The Countess was 44 years old. The beauty she was famous for throughout Hungary was beginning to fade. The first wrinkles, a dull gaze. Her skin no longer glowed as before. Erzsébet looked into the mirror and fell into despair. And so she turned to magic. An old woman named Darvulia was brought to her castle. The locals considered her a witch, and they say it wasn't for nothing. Darvulia stared at the Countess for a long time, and then she uttered the words that changed everything. "Blood is what you need, my lady. Bathe in the blood of girls who have never known a man, and youth will always be yours." This advice fell on fertile soil. Erzsébet had been aroused by the sight of blood before, but now the blood had a purpose, a goal, a meaning, and young peasant girls began to vanish from the surrounding villages. Some returned, those who turned out to be unsuitable, not virgins. They crawled back to their villages and whispered terrifying things to their parents. How they were kidnapped by the Countess's servants, how they were taken to the castle, how they were tortured there, and how the mistress herself, calm, beautiful Erzsébet, watched it all with a smile. But complaining about nobles was not done in those days, especially for peasants. Even the local priest, who knew everything, kept silent. because any complaint eventually reached the Countess's relatives, and her relatives owned all the land in the country and were the supreme judges. So the peasants kept quiet, and virgins kept disappearing. For 6 years, horror reigned in Čachtice Castle. For 6 years, the conveyor belt of murder worked like a well-oiled machine. And Erzsébet didn't do this alone. She had accomplices. The main one was a deformed hunchback, János Újvári, nicknamed Fitzko. He lived in the castle as a jester. Having suffered endless humiliation, he deadly hated anyone who was healthy and beautiful. Fitzko scoured the area looking for homes where beautiful girls were growing up. Then he reported back to the castle. Next, the maids stepped in. Ilona, a washerwoman turned executioner, and the old woman Dorka, the Countess's former nanny. They went to the peasants and persuaded them to give up their daughters for service. They promised money, a good position, and then they helped torture these girls in the castle and buried their bodies. When new victims arrived at Čachtice, the Countess herself met them, in silence. Erzsébet walked around them like a buyer at a market. She chose the most beautiful ones. The rest were sent to do hard labour. And the chosen ones were led to the dungeon. Ilona and Dorka immediately began to beat them, prick them with needles, tear their skin with pincers. The girls screamed, and Erzsébet herself came down to these screams. She worked herself into a frenzy. She took the torture instruments into her own white, well-groomed hands. Sometimes she got so carried away that she tore pieces of flesh out of their bodies with her teeth. When the victims could no longer stand, their arteries were severed. The blood was drained into basins, and the basins were used to fill the bath. Later, the process was optimized. Erzsébet ordered a true marvel of torture technology, the Iron Maiden, a hollow construct in the shape of a human body consisting of 2 halves. Inside were massive spikes. The victim was locked inside, raised up, and the blood, through special holes, flowed directly into the bath. When about 30 litres of blood accumulated, which meant at least 6 murdered girls, Bathory stripped naked and submerged herself in it. She lay there for hours, her eyes closed, smiling, believing, desperately, fanatically believing, that at that very moment, time was turning backward. But years went by, and the method wasn't working. The Countess continued to age. More wrinkles appeared, her skin became drier, and so she summoned the witch Darvulia once again. She demanded answers, she screamed and threatened, and the witch found a way out. She said, "The blood of commoners is too weak, my lady. For you, noble blood is required. Blue blood. The blood of young aristocrats. Only it will grant you immortality." And Erzsébet believed her. Many impoverished nobles lived in the area, and the Bathory clan was the grandest in the land. Many minor aristocrats dreamed of coming under their patronage. It meant money, connections, a future for their children. So when the Countess's people began visiting these families, inviting their daughters to Čachtice Castle, allegedly to be taught etiquette and courtly manners, the parents rejoiced. They gave thanks. They packed the girls' bags for the journey. They waved their handkerchiefs after the carriage. They didn't know they were sending their daughters to a slaughterhouse. And this became Erzsébet Báthory's fatal mistake. When not just peasant girls, but noble women began to vanish in Čachtice, the official authorities could no longer turn a blind eye.
question arises. How? How could one woman murder by the hundreds and nobody intervened? The answer is simple. Power. The Bathory clan ruled Transylvania and held colossal weight in Central Europe. Relatives harshly suppressed any attempts by outside judges or priests to pry into family affairs. The wealthiest magnates of Hungary protected her too. They were protecting themselves, their privileges. After all, putting a magnate of that level on trial would create a dangerous precedent. It would undermine the immunity of the entire aristocracy before the king. And her main protector was her cousin, Palatine Georg Thorzo, the supreme judge of Hungary. At first, he did everything to save the family from shame. He hushed up the cases. He didn't give them legal course. But at some point, the evidence became too overwhelming. Complaints came from nobles, from bishops, from Lutheran pastors. And Thorzo realized if he didn't intervene himself, the king would. And then it would be worse for everyone. Thus, Elizabeth's chief protector became her chief exposure.
Thurzo, leading an armed detachment, bursts into Čachtice Castle. What they saw would haunt these soldiers for the rest of their lives. In the ground floor corridor, the corpse of a girl, bloodless, white as wax. On the stairs, another one, still alive, barely breathing. In the dungeon, cages. In the cages, girls, waiting for their turn. And somewhere nearby, vessels, chutes, and it, that very bath. And upstairs in her chambers, a calm Elizabeth, having dinner, not understanding why anyone would dare disturb her, a Bathory, at such an hour. When she was told she was under arrest, she genuinely didn't understand. For what? Because in her worldview, she hadn't done anything terrible. She was just trying to stay young. Around 300 witnesses testified at the trial. Local residents, parents of the missing girls, former servants. The accomplices also testified against their mistress, both maids and the hunchback Fico. The witch Darvulia had already died by then, they say from fear of what was to come. The accomplices revealed a lot, but even more was revealed by the diary, a personal diary kept by Elizabeth herself, where she recorded every single murder. She didn't know their names, so she wrote things like number 169, short in stature, number 302, black hair. In total, there were 650 names on the list. 650. The Countess's helpers were executed with monstrous cruelty. The women had their fingers torn off with red-hot pincers and were then burned alive. The hunchback Fico was beheaded. But they didn't dare execute Elizabeth publicly. Too noble. Her execution would cast a shadow over the entire European aristocracy. Therefore, Thorzo handed down a different sentence, worse than death. Solitary confinement for life, inside her own castle. In 1611, bricklayers arrived at Čachtice. They bricked up the windows and doors of her bedroom, sealed her inside. They left only a tiny opening to pass through food and air. And that was it. No light, no conversations, only bread, only water, only darkness. For 4 years. Stories vary about what happened in that bricked-up room. Some say she was always silent, asked for nothing.
Others claim she prayed loudly and sang psalms at night. Still others insist the Countess completely lost her mind. She laughed hysterically, terrified the guards with wild, inhuman screams. On August 21st, 1614, Erzsébet Báthory died. She was buried near the castle walls, very close to the remains of her victims. She was 54 years old. The woman who searched for eternal youth found eternal darkness. Such is the legend of the Blood Countess, or rather a combination of legends, because historians argue to this day how much of this story is true and how much is political hit job, fabrications and medieval fears. But one thing we know for sure, the ruins of Čachtice Castle still stand on the hill today, and tourists who go down into its dungeons always say the same thing. It is very cold down there, even in summer. If this story gripped you, leave a like, subscribe to the channel and hit the notification bell. In the upcoming episodes, I will tell you about other remarkable women who changed history. Some through love, some through intelligence, and some like this. See you in the next video.